So welcome to my digital story. I'm going to be looking at young children and adolescent use of digital technology for my final paper. So far my research journey, if I'm talking about the process and the content, in terms of coming up with the idea of what I wanted to study, I've taught 8th graders for over a decade world history, so adolescents are usually on my mind. And I have two young nephews now, they're aged 5 and 10. So I've sort of been thinking more about the developmental journey of the younger individual as well. And with that in mind, I've been seeing, in the academic world specifically, a loss of real skill in terms of making sense of sources that they come across, determining whether or not they're accurate or reliable. And that's been on my mind quite a bit. But then I'm also interested in how young people and teenagers are interacting with the access that they have, usually in their hands in the form of a cell phone, on a day-to-day basis, 24/7 almost, how that impacts then their social and emotional growth as well, not just their academic lives. So that's where my thought process was when I started to research this particular topic and issue. In terms of the content, I really sort of started by going on to the records databases and taking a look at what I could find when I simply typed in like adolescent and technology. And from there, I sort of broadened my research as well. I found a couple of good opening articles that then gave me a couple of other names to research and to look at, including the article, An Empirical Study on Chinese Adolescents' Web Search Behavior. That really gave me a number of other scholars that I could turn to and look at then. A couple names that have shown up a few times would be Denise Augusto. She comes up quite a bit. I've seen a couple of different articles by her, although I only focus on two right now that I've actually read. It seems to be a pretty broad, well-covered area. So there's a lot of options to explore in terms of what I might want to focus the paper on. And actually that might be a difficulty in sort of paring down what I do want to focus on in terms of what areas of children's and adolescents' lives I want to explore, from how cell phones might impact one another, their ability to sleep properly, whether, perhaps exploring cyberbullying or even mobile addiction. So there's a lot of elements that I could go into. Scholars have really kind of covered the gamut there. In terms of the social media and technology in the research process, I have to say that having access to the records databases online, having that kind of access at my fingertips through my computer has been very helpful and valuable, really. It's allowed me to gather resources I probably wouldn't have access to or be able to find if I were simply thumbing through a variety of books. But let's kind of move on to some of the literature and what I have determined so far. So like I said before, the literature is quite broad and far-reaching, and my research process is still ongoing, so I may be narrowing it down or expanding it a little bit further by the time the final paper is written. But so far, here's where I've focused. First off, 7.4 billion is the number of phone subscriptions, according to Telecommunication Union, which was presented in the Yan article. That number really surprised me, and didn't surprise me. The idea that cell phones are just so far-reaching and wide is not new. I see it. In fact, recently, my brother and my sister-in-law got my 10-year-old nephew his own cell phone. Now, they have put limits on when he's allowed to use it, but the fact that he's 10 years old and has access in his hand at any given moment to the wide world out there is a little frightening, a little scary, and also, I guess, a little exciting, especially for him at that age. The fact that there are so many cell phones out there that children in many countries kind of grow up with access to computers or tablets is rather interesting in terms of how that might impact their development. When we're talking about children and technology, that the concept of that cell phone and those tablets being so readily available really impacts them from, simple personal developments like who they are and are not friends with, maybe online, versus who they are and are friends with on a day-to-day basis, to medical sometimes. In one article, they were talking about how cell phones are used by children sometimes in order to monitor their own sugar intake for children with diabetes. That particularly came up in the Zheng Yang article, Child and Adolescent Use of Mobile Phones. So clearly, phone access is a big part of this, and that access can really impact anything from, like I said before, how they might sleep at night, if there aren't any limitations placed on when they have access to these devices, to growing problems in terms of their development. In particular, sometimes, unfortunately, what can develop are problematic internet use, as defined by Moodley and Singh in their article, is this idea that the internet can create psychological, social, and school or work difficulties in your own life. And this, of course, would affect children as well. And the even maybe more serious compulsive internet use. So this idea, again, that Moodley and Singh talk about in their article, that you can sort of become attached to your devices, or almost addictive behavior, which is another issue that they bring up. This idea that these devices can have real lasting consequences. And that brings me to the second point there, that a number of articles also mention that there's a real need for parental controls when it comes to children and young adults, that a variety of social behaviors are impacted by their increased access, from, increased radiation to cyberbullying, which we know is a massive problem at this point in our country and other countries as well. When we look at adolescence and technology, cell phone growth is certainly there as well. But you're also looking at maybe increased social media impact. In this case, a couple of articles that I've looked at have discussed social media specifically. Interestingly enough, beyond discussing maybe some of the negative effects of social media and bullying and so on, there are also a number of articles talking about the real positives that social media can give young children. It gives them an avenue to ask questions that maybe they're not comfortable asking the adults in their lives. And as long as, again, there are parental controls or even academic controls, teachers sort of helping to guide the correct ways in which to engage with social media, it can be a very positive experience for young people. It's a way for them to seek help academically and personally in their lives. So it's not just this frivolous sort of time-sucking behavior that they engage in, that there can be real positives to that. There is, though, of course, this idea that academic seeking behaviors are important as well when it comes to access to technology, digital technology. When you look at their academic information seeking behaviors, you tend to notice that they have low internet information literacy skills. They are not very skilled at determining what is and isn't a reliable site or source. It's something that really needs to be broadened and expanded upon in the school systems to help them cover that, but also parents need to step in and become part of that conversation as well. When it comes to seeking out academic information, which we can assume would apply to them personal information they might be seeking out as well, if they're not turning to their peers or other human beings on social media, which does create the majority of who they turn to and is still kind of the dominant way in which people access information through other human beings. If they're not doing that, though, they tend to do quick Google searches or similar type searches, and they don't really look beyond maybe the first or second page that pops up. So there's very little real research or critical thinking going on there. And so there's a need to teach young children and adolescents that just because you type something in doesn't mean you're getting back the information that really is maybe the most reliable or even the most accurate to what you're seeking. So there comes an issue there where they need a little bit more guidance in that regard. In terms of my final paper and where I'm mentally, where I think I'm going, would start with obviously the introduction and kind of discuss social informatics in general and the idea of technology permeating the lives of children and adolescents. And then I would want to jump into the literature review process here, and I want to specifically look at children and technology both at home and at school, and then adolescents and technology both at home and at school. From there, I want to kind of maybe delve a little bit further into some of the overlapping issues and what that future impact on technology could be in terms of their social and emotional and political futures and all that that entails. I have this idea maybe that I might also discuss those literacy skills, information literacy skills, and the rise and the hope of combating the rise of fake news, but it might be a little too much for the single paper to kind of tackle. Areas that I really do need to continue to explore as I created this digital story, I really realized that I need to broaden my scope on the younger age children. I don't have nearly as much information regarding young children, so I'm thinking ages 1 to 10. I sort of pick up more so with the 11 and onward, the more adolescent kind of ages there. And I also seem to be focusing a little bit more in the academic world, and so I need to kind of broaden beyond the academic needs and uses and look at their everyday personal lives. I just recently found an article, I have not had a chance to read it yet, that might start that process, that might give me a few other articles or scholars that I could look to. And that article you can see listed below, Watching Young Children Play with Information Technology, Everyday Life Information Seeking in the Home. That's where I am at this point in the research process and where I think I'm going with my final paper. If you stay tuned, you can see my works cited thus far. There is also a need for more anecdotal elements here in my works cited, and that's something else that I'll be adding to my research process over the next couple weeks. Thank you.